welcome to episode 3 of this webinar series all about Lives Expert Training. Today, we're going to be talking about some facts and some myths when it comes to first aid. So, as we know, there's a lot of information out there and a lot of places you can go to get it. So, we've got online, in books, through social media. However, with a lot of information comes a lot of misinformation. So today we're going to look at some things you may have heard of before and you wonder, is that true or is that not? And then we're going to look at some frequently asked questions as well. So our first myth that we're going to look at is this one, putting butter on a burn. So I've not actually heard of this one before. However, a lot of the times when we teach first aid, as well as in the community, we do get asked about this. So, should you put butter on a burn, and where does this come from? Well, it's actually a folk remedy that has been around for centuries, but it can be traced back to a 19th century surgeon called General Frederick von Esmark, I think is his name, who recommended it as a battlefield medicine. So according to these war handbooks, he thought that putting butter on a burn would seal the burn off from the air and prevent infections. So you can see why he might have thought this. Butter would have been stored in the fridge, so it would have been cold. So it would have provided initially some relief because of the cold. And he was right in the fact that when the air moves over the burn, that's what makes it really painful. However, the fat in the butter, instead of cooling the burn, it would actually slow the process of heat release and therefore worsen the burn, making it more painful. Also, instead of preventing infections, putting butter on a burn can actually cause infections because of the bacteria in it. So you can see his thought process, but unfortunately this one is a myth. So what can you do instead to relieve a burn? Well, the best thing to use is cool, clean, running water for at least 20 minutes or until the burn cools down. Then we can cover it with cling film. We go for cling film because it prevents infection. It doesn't stick to anything, so it wouldn't stick to the burn. And it's see-through, so if it needs to then get checked out of hospital, they don't have to peel back the bandage, then the air would move over it, that'd be painful. It can stay on there and they can see through it. So the way we put cling film on, we don't wrap it round like a bandage, we would just layer it over the burn. So that's what we do for a burn: cool, clean, running water and cling film. So that's our first myth. Our second myth: if someone has swallowed a corrosive type of poison, such as bleach, washing tablets, something like that, you should make them sick. Now, the rationale behind this is to get it out of the body so that it doesn't cause any more damage. However, when someone swallows a corrosive type of poison, the airway will be damaged and then it begins to swell. So making them sick will actually cause even more damage, as in the poison will come back up, so will the stomach acid, and then you'll burn the airway again. So this could eventually then lead to the person struggling to breathe or even stop breathing completely. So what should we do instead? Well, call 999 and tell them exactly what the person has swallowed and follow their instructions. Then get the person to take slow, small sips of water. Our next myth: if someone is hyperventilating, get them to breathe into a brown paper bag. So this is one that we've probably seen on films and TV series, but does it work? Well, the thought behind this is that when you're hyperventilating, you take in large volumes of oxygen, which means then that your body loses a large amount of CO2. So breathing into a paper bag would help to restore that CO2. And while there hasn't been enough research to definitely prove that the paper bag method is harmful, there actually isn't any real evidence proving it helps either. And if you misdiagnose the person wrong, so if instead of hyperventilating, they were actually having an asthma attack or a heart attack or something else that causes shortness of breath, you could actually make their condition much worse. So we don't tend to recommend the paper bag anymore. What can we do instead? Well, try and reassure the casualty, be kind, take them away from whatever was making them feel panicked, so away from bystanders or anything else, and then coach their breathing. So talk through their breathing with them. And then also you could advise them to seek medical advice, maybe see their GP or something like that. What if, though, we try and coach their breathing, but they're still hyperventilating? No matter what we do, they're still hyperventilating. Well, eventually they will start to feel quite faint, and they probably will faint. So another myth that you might have heard is that if someone feels faint, you should get them to put their head between their knees. However, the issue with this is that if the person does then faint, falling forward like that can cause quite a lot of damage. So the best thing to do is get the person to lay on the floor and raise their legs, and that will hopefully relieve their feeling of feeling faint. Or if they have already fainted, again, try and get them onto the floor comfortably and elevate their legs, and that should help them to come around quicker. So our next myth then. This one you may have seen making the rounds on social media. So you might recognise this post. It's talking about cough CPR. Obviously, you can read it on the screen, but just to briefly summarise it, it's saying that you're driving home from work, you've had a hard day at work, and all of a sudden you start to get chest pain and pain that radiates into the arm and the jaw. You're a few miles from hospital, and then it goes on to talk about how you've taken CPR training. So the first thing about this post is that initially it's talking about a heart attack. So it mentions about chest pain, pain radiating into the arm and the jaw. They are symptoms of a heart attack. A heart attack is a blockage within the heart leading to a disrupted blood flow. Now, during a heart attack, a person can remain conscious and breathing, whereas then it goes on to talk about CPR. Now, CPR is used when someone has a cardiac arrest. So a cardiac arrest is different because instead of a blockage, it's a problem with the electrical activity within the heart. Now, when someone suffers a cardiac arrest, they will almost immediately become unconscious and not be breathing. So that's the difference between the two, which means then that this next part of the post we know isn't true, because it says about heart attack, then it says that you only have 10 seconds before losing consciousness. Well, we know that that's not true because, as we said, people can remain conscious when they have a heart attack. So they must be talking about a cardiac arrest instead. And then what it recommends is that if you're having a cardiac arrest, that you should cough repeatedly, and explains why you should do that. Now, is that true? Would coughing help you if you're in a cardiac arrest? Well, the Research Council UK, who develop guidelines, influence policy, and support research, they put out a statement regarding this cough CPR. And here's what they said. Research Council UK is concerned by such incorrect advice, which recommends that someone who is on their own and thinks they are having a heart attack should cough repeatedly, and whilst doing that, get themselves at once to hospital, by car if necessary. This incorrect advice has loosely been based on a few published case reports of people with sudden cardiac arrest being able to maintain a heartbeat and therefore a circulation by repeated vigorous coughing, so-called cough CPR. However, this has been achieved in hospitals during tests or treatment on the heart in which the person was being monitored closely and supervised by doctors throughout. Cardiac arrest usually causes loss of consciousness within a matter of seconds, giving a person no warning. Even if a person suspected they were having a cardiac arrest, it is highly unlikely that coughing could maintain enough circulation to do anything else, let alone drive safely. So, to summarise that statement then, this post has been very loosely based on some research that was done in hospital under very supervised and safe conditions. So it's not advised at all to try this yourself at home, and especially not to do this while continuing to drive or complete any other activities. So the last part of the post then goes on to say this: cardiologists, so no specific cardiologist mentioned, no research quoted, say that if someone gets this message and passes it on to 10 people, we can expect to save at least one life. And this, unfortunately, shows that probably the real reason for the original post, to get more likes, shares, and views. And then very well-meaning people thinking, oh, this is amazing, more people need to know this. They think they're sharing something real and life-saving. They continue to share it, and thus dangerous misinformation spreads. So before sharing anything, it's always good to do some research beforehand and make sure that the information you're sharing is correct. So, what can you do then if someone is suffering either from a heart attack or from cardiac arrest? Well, if someone you know or if you yourself are having heart attack symptoms such as crushing chest pain, shortness of breath, pain radiating into the arm, the jaw, neck, anything like that, then immediately stop driving or whatever you are doing, call 999, tell them your symptoms and follow their instructions. If someone collapses due to a cardiac arrest, so remember a cardiac arrest will be unconscious and not breathing, you should start CPR as soon as possible. You can also call for a defibrillator, which leads us nicely onto our next section. So a defibrillator, or defibrillators in general, have been around for quite a while now, and they're becoming increasingly more common within the local community as well as workplaces. But even still, there does seem to be some confusion surrounding them. So let's have a look at some of those myths and facts now. So the first one is a defibrillator can restart the heart. That's not technically true. A defibrillator actually resets your heart. So there has to be some sort of electrical activity within your heart in order for a defib to, in effect, turn it off and on again. What a defib does is it detects unusual and life-threatening heart rhythms. Once it's found one, it will say shock advised. Once you press the shock button, it will momentarily stop the heart, hopefully then resetting it back into its normal rhythm. So now we know what a defibrillator does, who can use a defibrillator? Well, you don't need to be trained to use a defibrillator. If someone is in cardiac arrest, you can call 999 and they can either direct you to your closest defibrillator, or if you know where it is, you can go there and then they will give you the code in order to unlock the cabinet to get the defibrillator out. Then simply turn it on and follow the instructions on the display. It's got really clear, simple instructions on it, including where to place the pads and things like that. However, it's always great to have training, isn't it? So that we can be prepared for these things, even though you don't necessarily need to be trained. Which is why at Lives we do CPR and defibrillator training in the community, as well as at schools as well. Another thing that we find that people often worry about is that they will put the defib pads on someone and the defibrillator will shock the person even though they don't need a shock. And then obviously that will cause them harm. However, a defibrillator, as we said, it looks for those irregular heart rhythms, those life-threatening heart rhythms. It uses state-of-the-art technology to do this. So it is very, very unlikely that one of them would shock someone who doesn't need a shock. Remember, a defibrillator has to be placed on someone who is unconscious and not breathing. So it's very unlikely then, once you put the defib pads on, that the defibrillator would get it wrong. So just to recap then, that's all of our myths for this episode. So just to recap, if you suffer a burn, the best thing to do is run it under cool, clean water for at least 20 minutes. If someone swallowed a corrosive poison, call 999 and get them to take small sips of water. If someone's hyperventilating, take them to a quiet place, coach their breathing, and if they start to feel faint, lay them down and elevate their legs. And lastly, if someone you know or you yourself are suffering from heart attack symptoms, call 999 and follow their instructions. Don't attempt to drive yourself to the hospital or anyone else to the hospital. If someone is in cardiac arrest, so that's unconscious and not breathing, immediately start CPR, call 999, and then you can also use a defibrillator. Even if you're not trained, follow the instructions on the defibrillator and remember that a defibrillator will only shock someone who needs a shock. So those are our myths. Now we're going to have a look at some frequently asked questions. So our first one is, what should I do if someone has something stuck in their wound? So this could be anything. This could be glass, anything like that. This on the picture has like a mini sword. That's the best one I could find. So anything like that, our instant reaction might be to pull it out because it shouldn't be in there. However, this is not the best idea. And why is that? Why should we not just pull it out? Well, you could do quite a lot of damage pulling the object out. Also, the object in there might actually be stopping a heavy bleed from starting. So once you pull it out, a heavy bleed might then start and you can't then put it back in. So what we should do instead is we could try and stabilize the object. So we could use a bandage to do that. Or if it's not very tall, if it's a little bit of glass, we could put something over the top. What we don't want to do is put pressure on, because obviously that's going to push it in further and cause them more harm. And you don't really want the object, if it's something like this, which is stuck out quite far, we don't want it moving about too much, because again, that's going to cause quite a lot of damage. So if you're not sure how to treat it, you don't quite know how to bandage it, then leave it in. And depending on where the object is, so obviously if it's like chest or abdomen, somewhere like that, call 999. Or if it's somewhere like a hand, like on the picture, we can take the person to A&E, where they're going to be seen much quicker than if we called an ambulance. So we can take them to A&E and they will be able to help, which we can see on our picture there. Our next question, what should I do if someone is heavily bleeding? So the best thing to do is pressure. Pressure is always the best thing to stop any type of bleed. Now, depending on the bleed, the type of bleed it is, will depending on the amount of pressure that we put on. So if it's just a smaller bleed, so something like you've been cutting vegetables in the kitchen and you've nicked your finger or something like that, again, this amount of pressure will be absolutely fine. Once it's stopped bleeding, we can then bandage it. So they say to put pressure on for about 10 minutes, make sure the bleeding is stopped, and then we can bandage it. What about someone who is bleeding really heavily then? So the blood is spurting out of the wound or it's flowing out very quickly. Well, then we need to use direct pressure. So the way we do that is, instead of pressure like this, if you feel that on yourself, this amount of pressure, it's okay. If you try with your knuckles, that's a bit more pressure. If you try with 2 fingers, you can feel that you can really press down. That's a lot of pressure that you can put in there. So what you do is you find the exact source of bleeding, put your fingers in the wound, find the exact source of bleeding, and you would press. Direct pressure stops 90% of all bleeds. So you should be able to stop that bleed by using direct pressure. That's the best way to stop the bleed. But also, if you know how to use them, we do also have things like tourniquets, which can also stop the bleed as well. Again, if you'd want more information on that, we do quite a lot of courses at Lives, which explain how to stop the bleed. So our next question, can I break someone's rib whilst administering CPR? The short answer here is yes. Yes, you could break someone's rib whilst administering CPR. So whilst you're giving CPR, you might hear a crack or feel something give a little bit. This could mean a broken rib, or it could be the cartilage breaking rather than a bone fracture. But no matter what you feel or hear, don't stop CPR. So broken ribs, they can happen, usually in older, frail people. but no matter what you hear, keep doing CPR. Broken ribs obviously aren't very nice, and it will be quite painful for the person when they come round and they're quite slow to recover. However, it's much better than the alternative, which if we stopped CPR would obviously mean that they don't then live. So it's unlikely as well that if the person came round, you know them, they heal in hospital, you see them again, it's unlikely that they would say to you, I can't believe you broke my ribs, and be really angry. Most likely they'd just be really thankful for your quick, effective response that saved their life. So short answer, yes, you can break someone's rib while administering CPR. Next question. What are the available emergency numbers and what services does each one provide? So our first emergency number is 999. We should call this if it is an emergency. So 999 in the UK is our emergency number, and then we'd ask for an ambulance and any other emergency services we might need. 111 is the non-emergency medical advice line. So again, this provides advice. So it can help you decide whether you need to go to a GP, A&E, a pharmacy, or if you do actually need the emergency services. So it's really good and can help us to make an informed choice about what we need to do. Then we've got 112. So 112 is the emergency number for, as it says on there, all of the EU as well as the UK and all of those other countries mentioned. So if you ever have gone abroad and you thought to yourself, I don't actually know what the emergency number is here. Well, what you can do is you can call 112 and that'll direct you to the emergency services of that country. That's really helpful. That can be used on any phone as well, even one without signal. It can be used on. It doesn't give the emergency services your location. That's what some people think. If you call that, it will give them your location. To do that, you either obviously give them your location, or if you're not sure where you are, you can use apps like What 3 Words, which are really helpful for giving the emergency services your location. So there are emergency numbers. And those are all of our frequently asked questions. So to recap then, if someone has something stuck in a wound, we should not pull it out. Instead, we should leave it in and get them to A&E, where the doctors will be able to sort that for us. Can I break someone's rib while administering CPR? Yes. Likely you will hear the cartilage crackling, but you can break a rib. However, we continue to do CPR even if we suspect we have done, and let the emergency services know when they turn up. The emergency numbers in the UK that we can use are 999 for emergencies, 111 for advice, and then 112 is the emergency number for all of the EU, as well as some other countries as well, and will take you straight to the emergency services of that country. So a really handy number to know. What should I do if someone is heavily bleeding? Pressure, direct pressure if possible, and that will stop the bleed. And then obviously that's an emergency, so we would call 999 as well. So those are all of our facts, myths, and frequently asked questions. So thank you so much for joining us. Next time we will have another exciting webinar episode, so please join us then. But now thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.